The deputy sheriff did not look at her when he threaded the chain through the door handle. He kept his eyes on his hands, on the padlock, on the hasp, on the cold steel links that clinked once in the October morning air and then went still. Margaret Hollis stood in her own doorway, in her house dress and her flat shoes, and she watched him do it. She was 71 years old. She had lived in that house since 1925. She had cooked 34 Thanksgivings in the kitchen behind her and buried her husband out of the front room and brought 2 children home from the hospital to the bedroom at the end of the hall. And now a man in a county uniform was threading a chain through her door handle, and he would not look at her while he did it. A small crowd had gathered in the dirt yard, neighbors in clean shirts. A man from First Consolidated Bank in Sweetwater, standing apart from the neighbors, holding a brown folder flat against his chest, the way a man holds something he does not want to open in the wind. 2 county workers near the barn. Nobody was talking. Nobody was moving. The windmill turned slow and dry behind the house, and somewhere in the stubble field, a meadowlark called once and did not call again. The deputy clicked the padlock shut. Margaret Hollis put one hand flat against the door she could no longer open. She pressed her palm against the wood, the same wood her husband Earl had hung himself in the spring of 1926, planing it smooth on a sawhorse in the yard while she watched from the porch steps. She pressed her hand against it, and she did not cry. She had already done that. For a moment, no one moved. Then, at the back of the crowd, a man stepped forward. He was large, wide in the shoulders, wearing a road-worn canvas jacket and a tan Stetson with the brim pulled low against the morning glare. He had driven in from Fort Worth before sunrise and had not planned to stop anywhere near Sweetwater. He did not know this woman. He did not know this road. He had come off the highway because he saw the sheriff's cruiser turn down the farm road, and then a second car, and then a third, all moving in that slow, official way that means something has already been decided, and the people it was decided about have not been asked. Something about the procession of it had moved his boot off the gas before his mind had finished making the decision. He stood at the edge of the crowd and looked at the chain on the door, and looked at the woman's hand on the wood, and looked at the bankman standing apart with his folder. He did not say anything yet. He was still deciding, not whether to act, but how. Because the man in the tan Stetson had a very particular kind of anger, the quiet kind, the kind that has somewhere specific to go. But that moment didn't start there. To understand what he did next, and why it would be talked about in Sweetwater for the next 20 years, you have to go back. Back to what this farm was. Back to what it cost. And back to what this man had been carrying since he was 12 years old and watched his own father hand the keys to a stranger from a bank. Before we go any further, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and your state in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. The padlock was shut. The chain was on the door. Margaret Hollis had her hand on wood she no longer legally owned, and the man in the tan Stetson, whose name nobody in that yard had placed yet, was still moving forward. What he was about to do had never appeared in any interview, never been mentioned in any newspaper, never spoken of publicly in his lifetime. But 60 witnesses saw it happen, and not one of them ever forgot it. Margaret Hollis came to that land in 1925 as a bride of 19, with $30, a cedar hope chest, and a husband named Earl, who believed in 2 things without reservation: hard work and good soil. The farm was 280 acres of West Texas wheat and cattle ground outside Sweetwater in Nolan County, where the sky runs flat to the horizon in every direction and the wind never fully stops. Earl broke the north pasture the first year with a borrowed tractor. Margaret broke the south with her hands, planting a kitchen garden that by 1932 was feeding half the county. During the worst years of the Depression, she put food on other people's tables before she put it on her own. Nobody asked her to. She just did it the way she did everything, without announcement, without hesitation, without waiting to be told it was her responsibility. Earl died in 1953. Heart, like so many of the men out here who spent themselves completely on the land and left nothing in reserve. He was 54 years old, and he died in the north pasture with his boots on, which was exactly how he would have chosen it. Margaret was 47. She did not sell. She did not ask her son in Lubbock to come home and take over. She hired two hands, managed the grain contracts herself, drove to Abilene to negotiate prices that the elevator men did not expect a woman to negotiate. She ran the place for 6 years alone, and she ran it well. Then the drought years came. 56 and 57 brought thin wheat and falling prices. The winter of 58 killed the early crop entirely. Margaret went to First Consolidated Bank in Sweetwater in the spring of 59 and took a loan of $6,400 against the land. She paid it down faithfully through the summer. Then the harvest came in short. She missed 2 payments in the fall. The bank sent letters. She answered every one personally, in her own hand, with numbers and dates and a plan. In July of 1959, she drove to Sweetwater and sat across the desk from the branch manager, a 34-year-old named Gerald Platt, who had never pulled a calf or turned a field in his life. She told him she would have the full balance by November harvest. He told her the bank could not wait until November. She drove home believing she had bought herself 4 more months. Gerald Platt had already ordered the eviction paperwork before she reached the highway. Margaret Hollis had done everything right. She had answered every letter. She had driven to that bank herself. She had laid out the numbers clearly as anyone could lay them, and none of it had mattered, because the decision had been made before she walked through the door. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that on the same Tuesday morning, a stranger turned off a highway 40 miles away and started driving in her direction without knowing why. In the fall of 1959, John Wayne was 52 years old, and he was driving alone. No assistant, no publicist, no studio car. Just him and a battered ranch truck on a flat Texas highway in the gray hour before the morning opened up. He had wrapped the horse soldiers for John Ford 3 weeks earlier. A long shoot, a hard one, with the kind of tension on set that never fully made it into the finished picture. He was heading toward a property in New Mexico, a ranch parcel he had been looking at buying, and he had chosen to drive it rather than fly it, because driving was the one thing that still gave him silence when he needed it. He was not a man who talked easily about his interior life. The interviews gave you the jawline and the drawl and the opinions about communism and the film industry. They did not give you the other thing, the wound underneath the public man that the people closest to him knew was there, and knew better than to press on directly. His father, Clyde Morrison, had lost everything in the California drought years of the early 1920s. A pharmacy first, then a farm in Lancaster, then the family's financial footing entirely. Wayne was 12 years old when he watched his father stand in the kitchen and apologize to a man from a bank. He never spoke about that memory in any interview. But the people who knew him well, John Ford, Ward Bond, his longtime stunt coordinator, Yakima Canute, said the same thing in different words across different decades, that there was something in Wayne that could not pass a certain kind of injustice without stopping, that the anger it produced in him was not loud. It was deliberate. He was somewhere between Abilene and Sweetwater when he saw the sheriff's cruiser turn off the highway onto a farm road, then a second car behind it, then a third. All of them moving in that slow, predetermined way, the way official vehicles move when the outcome has already been written and the visit is only the delivery of it. He did not make a decision. His hands made it for him. He lifted his boot off the gas and turned onto the farm road and followed the cars through the dust. He told himself he was just looking. If you've ever slowed down because something felt wrong, even when it wasn't your business, you already know exactly what was happening in that truck. Subscribe and stay with me, because what he did next, nobody saw coming. He pulled up behind the last county car and stepped out into the cold morning air and stood there for a moment with the truck door open behind him. Down the farm road, maybe 100 yards ahead, he could see the crowd in the yard and the deputy at the door and the chain in his hands. He could see the old woman in the doorway. He could see her hand go up and press flat against the wood. and something that had been sitting quietly in his chest since he was 12 years old and standing in his father's kitchen, something that had never fully gone away, moved. He walked through the crowd the way a man walks when he has already settled something inside himself. People moved without being asked, not because they recognized him yet, most of them hadn't placed the face, but because of the way he was moving. There was no performance in it, no anger on the surface, just a large man in a canvas jacket walking toward the front of the crowd with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided that what is happening in front of him is his business, whether it was meant to be or not. He stopped in front of the deputy. He looked at the chain on the door. He looked at Margaret Hollis with her hand still flat against the wood. Then he turned to the bank man with the brown folder. "How much?" he said. The bank man looked up. He had not placed the face either. "I beg your pardon?" "The note. What's left on it?" The bank man told him, $4,200 in arrears, plus accrued interest and the county filing fee. Wayne reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket. He took out a long brown leather wallet, and he counted the money onto the hood of the nearest car, in the open air, in front of 60 people, the way a man does something he wants witnessed, so there was no argument about it afterward. He counted it slowly, and he counted it right the first time. $4,200, and enough above it to cover every fee the bankman mentioned, and one he hadn't. He held it out. "That's the note, the interest, and your fee," he said. "Write her a receipt. Right now. Standing up. Before you touch that money." The bankman's hand was shaking slightly when he opened the folder. He wrote the receipt against the hood of the car. Wayne watched him write every word of it. Then he turned to the deputy. He did not raise his voice. "Take the chain off the door." The deputy looked at the bankman. The bankman nodded without looking up. The deputy took the chain off the door. Margaret Hollis had not moved from the doorway. She was looking at Wayne the way a person looks at something their mind has not yet found the correct category for. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am." "Why would you do this?" It was not quite a question. It was something older and harder than a question. He looked at the farm, the windmill, the barn, the kitchen garden still going in October, the pasture his father never had. He looked at it for a moment before he answered. "My father lost his place when I was 12, he said. I watched him hand the keys to a man from a bank, stood right there in the kitchen and apologized for something that wasn't his fault. He put his wallet back inside his jacket. I've been handing that money back ever since." The receipt was written. The chain was off the door. Margaret Hollis was standing in her own home again. But what Wayne did in the next 2 hours, what he said at that kitchen table over a cup of coffee that nobody asked him to stay for, that is the part of this story that the bankman from Sweetwater could never bring himself to finish telling without stopping. Margaret Hollis made coffee. She did not ask him if he wanted any. She simply went to the kitchen and put the pot on the way she would for any person who had just done something that required sitting down afterward. Wayne came inside and took his hat off and sat at the kitchen table and did not say anything while she worked at the stove. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and flour and the particular dry warmth of a house that has been lived in for a long time by someone who knows how to live in it. She set the cup in front of him and sat across the table, and they talked for 2 hours. Not about Hollywood, not about pictures or studios or any of it. He asked about the wheat operation, which fields drained and which ones flooded, what she was getting per bushel at the Sweetwater elevator, whether the cattle paid better than the grain in a dry year. Margaret answered all of it directly, with numbers, the way a person talks when they are used to being the only one in the room who knows the figures. And somewhere in that second cup of coffee, she realized she was talking to a man who actually understood what she was talking about, not performing interest, actually following it. Before he stood to leave, he wrote something on the back of the receipt the bankman had filled out in the yard, a name and a phone number. He set it on the table and put his hat back on. "If they come back," he said, "you call that number. Tell them Duke sent you." He said it the way a man states a fact, but it landed the way a promise lands, with weight and without expiration. Has anyone ever shown up for you at exactly the moment everything was being taken away? Tell me about it in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Margaret never called the number. She never needed to. But she kept that receipt in her Bible for the next 24 years. And what Wayne had written on the back of it, 6 words in his own hand, tells you more about who he actually was than anything he ever said in front of a camera. John Wayne never mentioned it. Not once. Not to his third wife, Pilar. Not to his sons, Michael and Patrick. Not to John Ford. Not to any journalist who sat across from him in the remaining 20 years of his life. He did not mention it in the autobiography he never finished. He did not mention it in the long recorded interviews he gave toward the end, when he knew the end was coming and spoke more openly than he ever had. He took it with him the way a man takes the things he did purely because they were right, quietly, without requiring anyone to know. The story came out from the other side. Gerald Platt, the branch manager from First Consolidated, told it at a Lions Club dinner in Abilene in 1974. He had not been proud of his role in it, and he said so plainly, the way a man names a regret out loud when he has carried it long enough to know it isn't getting lighter. The deputy confirmed the account in a letter to a Sweetwater newspaper in 1979. Margaret Hollis never sold her story to anyone. She was asked twice, once by a Dallas magazine in 1967 and once by a television producer in 1972. She declined both times without explanation. What Wayne did that morning was not a performance. There was no camera pointed at him. There was no charitable foundation to route the money through for the tax benefit. There was no publicist who knew he was in Sweetwater that day. There was a man on a highway who turned down a farm road because something felt wrong, and who happened to have enough cash in his coat pocket and enough of his father's memory in his chest to do something about it. The farm is still there. The windmill is still turning, and inside that farmhouse kitchen, framed on the wall beside the window where the afternoon light hits it every day, is not the deed and not a photograph. It is something smaller. Something with 6 words written on the back of it in a dead man's handwriting. And those 6 words are the whole story. The 6 words Wayne wrote on the back of that receipt were these: "This land belongs to the people who worked it." No signature. Just that. In his own hand, in blue ink, on the back of a bank receipt dated October 1959. Margaret Hollis kept it in her Bible, between the pages of Ruth, the book about a woman who would not leave the land that had become hers through love and labor. She farmed those 280 acres for 12 more years after that October morning. She learned the combine properly in 1961, the year her last hired hand left for the oil fields. She carried the operation in her head, the way Earl had carried it. Acreage, yield, price per bushel, rainfall deficit. Except now there was no banknote in there, just the running of it, and she ran it clean. Her daughter Clara, and Clara's husband, took over in 1971, when Margaret's knees finally gave out their honest resignation after 46 years of hard ground. After Clara came Clara's son. After him, his daughter. 4 generations on the same 280 acres outside Sweetwater, Texas. Never mortgaged again. Never sold. Handed down the way land is supposed to be handed down. Not through lawyers and auction notices, but through memory and mourning and the specific knowledge of which fields flood and which ones drain. John Wayne died in June of 1979. He left behind more than 150 films and a very short list of things he ever did when no one was watching. The receipt is still in the kitchen. The afternoon light still finds it through the window every day and holds it for a while before moving on. The wheat is still coming up. If this story reached you, share it with a veteran. Share it with a farmer. Share it with anyone who still believes one person can change everything by simply deciding to stop. Subscribe for more stories about the men and women who showed us what that actually looks like.